My name is George Mavrolis. I'm superintendent of the Middleton-Cross Plains Area School District. My co-presenter who left the room is Perry Hibner, our communications director, and we have several district folks, folks from EUA, our architect partner, Findorf, our construction partner, around the room. We're going to get to that later. We're going to start with about a 20 to 25 minute overview presentation. We'll take some questions from the large group. But then really the strength of the evening is for you to be able to drill in to ask very specific, more detailed questions based on what your questions are. High school related, elementary, high school instruction related, elementary instruction related, the park cafeteria or the early learning center, financing, enrollment projections, and so on. So we're going to get to that in just a little bit. So, why are we here? Not literally why are you here tonight, but how did we get to this point as a school district? Well, one of the main reasons that we have grown so rapidly is because the district and the students get the credit. We're a recognized, highly acclaimed school district. We've been ranked nationally and in the state with our school report cards, with we're #1 in STEM at Middleton High School. We have an innovation zone charter school. We are, as I said, 6 of our 9 schools are significantly exceeding expectations. And the last bullet, because of that, people want to move here. They want to move here so their children can come to school here. And it's been happening at record rates over the last 3 years. And I can tell you, for this school year, we shattered our enrollment record again. We're over almost 200 to 210 students additional from last fall. And so now we're the fastest growing school district in Dade County for 4 consecutive years. We did get that confirmed this week. The other piece that makes living here so desirable is we have great communities. You know, whatever municipality you live in, they're recognized for being great places to live. And also we have a very vibrant business community. So when you put outstanding schools together with great communities and a vibrant business community, you get a lot of growth. And that's where we're at right now. So the picture up above is what it looks like during the day in this very spot. That picture is from West Middleton, lunchtime, and this room is full. You also, if you didn't notice before tonight, hopefully you saw over here on this side of the building, we had to build 2 temporary classrooms over the summer because we are completely out of space. And even with the 2 classrooms over here on the side of the building, we're still using rooms that weren't designed for full classrooms as classrooms. The bottom picture, sorry about that, is from Middleton High School. And Middleton High School is now about 300 students over capacity. When we put this presentation together, we're a little over 200 students over capacity, but we're up another 75 students this year. So that is a picture of what the hallways look like during passing time. This has been our enrollment for the past 5 years. They're in the gray. And then our projected enrollment moving forward. We utilize the Applied Populations Lab from UW-Madison to do our projections. And I can tell you in the gray, those were actual. We exceeded the enrollment projections each of those years. We were above projection to the point that Applied Populations Lab has had to adjust their formula for Middleton-Cross Plains School District. They're used statewide, Dane County-wide by school districts for enrollment projections, but they've had to tweak their formula for us because we're growing faster than their formula projects. As you can see, our enrollment projections show another 1,100 students between now and 2022, and another 2,200 students by the end of the 28 school year. We're crowded across the district, but the 2 levels that are most overcrowded and where we have the most concern is elementary and high school. If you recall, in 2012, we addressed our middle school needs, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a little bit. But right now, our elementary, we're going to be over 300 students over capacity in about 5 years, 4 to 5 years, and 500 students over capacity at the high school in about 4 to 5 years. So I'm going to turn it over, as I said, to Perry Hibner, our communications director, to talk about what process did we use over the last 2 years to get to this point.
Thanks, everybody. Sorry, I was out there trying to greet more people as we came in. So So this is a more recent timeline, but actually, if it was longer, and we've talked about this before, I'd like to take us back all the way to 1996. And the reason why I'm picking that year is because that's the last year that this district built any new schools. That's when Glacier Creek and Sunset Ridge were built. And at the time, enrollment in the district was around 4,800. So on that previous slides, George showed you that this year's enrollment with the 200 to 210 more students will be close to 7,200 students. So we have added 2,400 students, and yes, we've added additions. We've done remodeling. Obviously, we did a big project at Cromery in 12, but we haven't put a new building in 22 years and added all those kids. All right? At the time, too, before we move on to the next slide, we weren't thinking this way, but that really was phase one of our long-range master planning, and that's how we're referring to it now. So we did middle school work in 12, and now it's time for us to look at the high school and elementary school. And I'll be honest, we've told other groups this. This is George, and I don't know if he said this before I get back in here. This is probably our between 35 and 40th presentation already since August. And we tell every group, this is phase two. There will be a phase three. And it will probably be somewhere between 2 to 6 years out where we're looking at having to deal with the middle school and maybe other levels depending on how this growth continues. So we used a very extensive planning process. And one of the things we try to stress to everybody, it was community driven. It wasn't driven by administrators. It wasn't driven by the school board. It wasn't driven by our staff, although all those groups had input and were kept abreast. But the reality is that we brought the community in to say what are the best solutions for this district going forward. So the first group, the main group, was the Facility Planning Committee, and there are some folks here, and I'll introduce them later. But what was kind of amazing about that is we put out a call to the community and said, would you like to serve on a group that's going to meet for 2 years? I don't know if we said 2 years at the time, but we said, all right, thanks, Sarah. But they ended up working for 2 years for us, and we had more than 60 people apply. We thought that was a little unruly to have that many, so we brought more than 20 in, and they started in September 2016, worked through May 2018, pretty much met every month, and reported to the board, toured 6 of our schools, including West Middleton, went to Wanakee Intermediate School, saw those enrollment projections, looked at our facility reports, and brainstormed a ton of different ideas for what might work best for us. And then from there, we would constantly update, George and I would, our staff to make sure they're involved. But also in February 2018, we had 3 community workshops where we kind of test drove some of the ideas that the FPC had to see how the community would respond to them. At that point then, we sent out a community survey. And I guess I'd like to ask the room, how many of you took that survey? Well, good. That puts you among those nearly 3,400 people who did. Now, to give you some context, because in a lot of presentations I'll hear from people who go, that doesn't seem like a lot when you have more than 30,000 people that make up the district. Well, that last state Marquette poll that did state things for the governor's race, Senate race, and other things, they had somewhere between 800. I thought I saw 641, but then I saw today 800. So somewhere between 641 and 800 people representing the entire state to get their margin of error and to find out what the results are. I think 3,400 is a very reflective indicament of what people think in this community, is shown by the margin of error of less than 2%. You know, and I know you can read those numbers, but they jumped out at us. I mean, the idea that nearly 80% of our residents say the district adds value to their property and that you need to go to referendum. Nearly 2/3 saying building a bigger high school is the right solution there. More than 60% saying you need a 7th elementary school. And then those 2 numbers at the bottom were really, I think, mind-boggling to us, you know, compared to the rest of the state maybe. You know, the support we have for education in this district. 66% said they'd support a referendum of $130 million, and 55% said they'd support one of $160 million. And I'll turn it back over to George, and he'll talk about the options that are on the ballot.
So I can't stress enough what Perry just said, is that all of the ideas came from our citizen committee. All of the ideas were put on the community survey, and the board is moving forward with what the community told us they would support. So this is what the community told us they would support. Build a new elementary school adjacent to the Pope Farm Conservancy. The reason it's adjacent to the Pope Farm Conservancy is that's property we've owned for about 15 to 20 years. And so it's a beautiful site. Doesn't cost any additional money. That's been paid for years ago. And so putting the 7th elementary school on that site. renovate and expand Middleton High School, including bringing the Clark Street Community School students and faculty into one inclusive high school. Add a cafeteria, a room like this at Park Elementary School. Park is the only elementary school in our school district that does not have a cafeteria. And so they still serve breakfast and lunch in the gymnasium and work the PE classes around the meals. And finally, once the students and faculty from Clark Street come into the inclusive high school, we can go back, renovate with some bathrooms for little kids and move our early learning programs into one building. Right now they're in 3 different buildings, and so we'll be able to bring them into one, freeing up some space in 2 elementary schools by doing that. That's question 1. You need 1 for construction, and then you need 1 to operate the new buildings. And we can't separate it, and we can't combine the 2. They have to be separate. So the second question is all the staffing and operational costs and everything needed for that 7th elementary school and the expanded space at the high school and park and the early learning center, and also some technology and safety and security upgrades across the district to equalize that, because we're going to be able to add some new safety features to the new construction, but we also want then to be able to go back and do the same at our other schools to keep all our children safe. So that question, year 1 will be $2.8 million, and then every year after the year 1 would be $4.8 million. So this here is the elementary site and the elementary school. On the left, I know it's hard to read, is the Pope Farm Conservancy. So we're just to the right of that, and to the right of us is the Blackhawk neighborhood. So if you can kind of picture where that is, an Old Sauk Road runs across the bottom. The property is about 39 acres, and it's large enough to house 2 schools. So the orange, the bright orange, is where the elementary school would go, and then there's kind of a faded gray, and it's really hard to see in this lighting, but that's where a future middle school could go someday, again, on land we already own. This is more like a jigsaw puzzle. This is the Middleton High School site. And for those of you that were around in 2011 and 2012, well, more 2012 and 13 and 14, it's kind of similar to what we did at Cromrie. So I'm going to start with the parts in the middle. The parts in the middle that are white and blue, that's existing building. So what we're proposing to do is add in addition the orange on the north, or the upper part. That would come first. Then the students would be able to take what's currently our existing building and then spread into the new part. And then down below, it's a little high for me to reach, up there, the south side of the building, we have areas that have been added to 7 different times dating back to 1929. So part of the building would actually come down and then be rebuilt with the orange on the bottom that looks kind of like an L shape. That means, kind of like we did at Cromrie, we would flip some green space. Some of the green space is currently on the north side of the building, would flip to the south side of the building, and so on. So in the blue is heavy renovation to some of our lab spaces, our tech labs, our manufacturing labs, art studios, culinary arts, those types of spaces. So this would bring together one inclusive high school. We currently have 3 options, but then we have spin-offs. We have Middleton High School, we have Clark Street Community School, which is our charter school, and then we also have an e-school where students can get their instruction online. Then we have students that do hybrid, that do parts of 2 of those or parts of all 3 of those. And so by having all of our programs under one roof in one inclusive environment, we're going to be able to have customizable paths to graduation for students. And so we're really trying to create flexibility. That's really the key to this. Then by having a larger school, we also are looking at ways to create smaller learning communities or learning hubs so that kids can plug in and have a lot of peer groups in smaller environments. Very much student focused. It's all going to be on student engagement. How we design those spaces is going to be for maximum collaboration, maximum flexibility, and finally to develop learner identity. So these are the kinds of spaces. These are prototypes. These are actually high schools from around the country, and these are the kinds of spaces that we currently don't have, where larger, group areas, places where kids can gather, flexible spaces, breakout spaces, and so on. There's one more. Okay. Park Elementary School in Cross Plains is right here, and then the orange to the north would be where the cafeteria would be added. Again, very similar to this room right here. And then this is currently the Clark Street Community School building. It's, in case you didn't know, it's really close to the high school. You can kind of see it right across the parking lot. And the renovation in blue would be bathrooms, again, for our early learning program for our 3, 4, and 5-year-olds. Also, you may be aware that we have a long history of commitment to sustainability. We're one of 10 districts in the country that's recognized as a green school, part of the Green Schools Network. We've had many, many schools win the U.S. National Green Ribbon Awards, as you can see right here, including this school right here, West Middleton, to the point where Perry said the state told us stop nominating schools because we've won too many times. Our point in this is that as we look at new construction, we are looking at sustainability. We're looking at how do we reduce our footprint, our environmental footprint, how do we save energy costs. And so we're looking at solar, we're looking at geothermal, we're looking at any ways that we can to save money and to save on the environment.
So again, and I'm going to ask for a show of hands again. How many of you last week or early this week received our 4-page newsletter? Okay, that's good because so far the only household that I'm aware that hasn't received it is mine. So, but anyway, this was in there. It was also on I believe it was on the postcard you got earlier in the month. But again, this is something that we know people want to look at right away. So, as I say at every presentation, we put the 100,000 up there knowing that it's mythological. There's no home in Middleton-Cross Plains, so it's 100,000, and if there is, my wife and I want to buy it. But it does make it really easy to figure out what the tax impact will be. So once we get to year 2 with the operational, it's just a little under $200 worth $100,000 of property. Now, I did the math for me, and I know in the city of Middleton that works out to about a 10% property tax increase. George and I like to include this. This is last year's mill rate comparison for school districts of comparable size in Dane County. We don't use all the districts. There's about 16 in Dane County, but you can see that other than DeForest, we had the lowest mill rate. And again, we understand how this works. People go, well, my property values have gone up. I haven't seen a reduction in taxes. No, but the district has tried to do a good job over these last handful of years of really making sure that we keep our mill rate down and that we're not, if your taxes are going up, it's not because of the school district. I think this year during the preliminary budget, if I remember correctly, a $300,000 house in the district, we estimated a 3.5% increase in equalized value. The school district portion of your taxes would go up $3 as a result of that this year because the mill rate's going to drop to below $10, it looks like, for the school district this year. The construction, and again, it's because there's a lot of parts to this, it can seem complicated. So if the referendum passes in November, the park cafeteria addition and the new elementary school adjacent to Pope Farm would be the first 2 projects done. And the students would move into those, or those would be done. Students would be able to move into the new elementary school by the fall of the 2021 school year. At that point, construction really begins in earnest for the high school, and that'll be done over 2 phases. And for those of you who remember Cromrie, we had to do the same thing with there because we don't have a place to move the students in the short term. So the first phase, that north phase that George talked about, will be done in time for the 21-22 school year, and the second phase will be done in time for the 22-23 school year. Okay? So a few other bits before we break off here then. So, and again, this was on the postcard and in the mailing as well. There are 3 big messages we're trying to make sure everybody in our community knows about before November 6th. And the first one is that we take planning for growth very, very seriously. You saw those numbers before. We are a growing school district, and every projection looks like we're going to continue to grow. We want to plan for that growth, and it's a challenge. There's a balancing act here. I've had people ask me, well, why didn't you do more, plan for more growth in 2012 with Cromrie and Glacier Creek? Well, the challenge is for every square foot we add at a building, you're basically talking about $200 to $225 you're adding onto the cost of it. So we don't want to see classrooms sitting empty. We want to make sure that our spaces are being used. So again, we're trying to plan for that growth, but also be responsible to our taxpayers. The second one, we are an academic leader, and it's not just in Dane County. We're an academic leader in the state of Wisconsin. When George talked about those state report cards before, other than looking at a couple of districts in Waukesha County, like Brookfield, like Elmbrook, which is Brookfield Central and Brookfield East, and maybe Glendale, Nicolay North and Milwaukee, the reality is our schools are superior to every other district in the state of Wisconsin. I don't say that lightly, and I don't say it to belittle other districts. We have great schools, and our families know that, and that's why they want to move here. And then the third one is we take being fiscally responsible very, very seriously. All right? The reality is that, I told you before, those survey numbers said the community would support somewhere between 130 and 160 million. The board went closer to the lower end than the higher end. Again, there have been some districts that don't, that they'll try to go for more. We said, no, what do we truly need right now? So there are a few questions we tend to get when we're out doing these presentations, and we like to address them beforehand as much as possible. And the first one is, why not a second high school? And there are a couple of factors there. The first one, as you can see, is cost. And I'll play conservative here. So I think a lot of you know Verona's building a new high school right now. They're building it for capacity for 2,200 students. It costs them $165 million. We wouldn't need 2,200 students, but we would need 1,500. We would need the land. We would need to have some of the pretty much same amenities that Middleton High School has. So let's say that's 150 million, maybe not 160 and 70. Middleton High School has structural issues. Mr. Plank can talk about them later, but there's everything from fire alarm issues to water issues to hallways too narrow, bathrooms too small. And so the reality is there are upgrades that need to be done there, so we're talking about 30 million there. And now you still have an elementary school to build, a cafeteria down at Park. You're talking about a $220 million referendum. For context on that survey, 30% of our community said they would support $220 million. And this is the only time you'll hear me talking about voting or passing a referendum, but that's nowhere close to what it takes to have to pass any referendum. Okay? So that's a long ways away. So again, from a cost standpoint, it doesn't make sense. Plus, we haven't even talked about the operational cost. You're talking another $3 to $5 million more for operational, and that's going to be recurring because now you're running a second school where you have a second set of administrators, second set of utilities all the way through. There are also programming, and George does a better job with this than I do, but I'll point out a couple of things first. If we have two schools of 1,500, we're going to have fewer course offerings than we do in one school of 2,200 right now. Steve, correct me if I'm wrong, is it about 220 classes we have this year, unique classes? Wanakee, which is slightly under 1,500, I checked with them, they have about 170. So that means we would have 50 fewer types of courses than we currently have right now. And I'm going to give you an example of one. My two youngest children took Mandarin Chinese. I'm pretty sure that's a course we couldn't offer with two high schools because 5 or 10 kids would be at one school, 5 or 10 would be at another. So, and again, I know our families like having those course offerings, so having that conversation about which courses your child doesn't get to take would not be a pleasant one. All right. We didn't phrase this as a question, but this is one we get especially from our younger families. What about boundaries? What's going to happen? And anybody who's been to FPC meetings knows, because they've heard us say this over and over again. If the referendum passes, we've got to change the boundaries because we go from 6 elementary schools to 7. If the referendum fails, we're going to change the boundaries because we need to do something about the overcrowding here at West Middleton. So we're going to have to spread the students across 6 schools. And that's a short-term fix because we're going to have to come back and ask for a 7th school again. When? We'll see. But the reality is we'd have to do boundaries twice. Now, the other thing we get asked, especially people at least, I won't say they ask, but they also sort of imply, they're like, you guys know what you're doing for boundaries, just tell us. We have done nothing with boundaries right now. We're waiting till after the referendum, and then the board has said they want to use the same process that was used with facility planning. They want a group of community members to come together to make suggestions about the best way to take our 63 neighborhoods and divide them among 7 schools. And then before I go on to this one, there is a third question, and I'll just go ahead and address it, and that is, why aren't you doing something at the middle school level now? And I remind everybody, we did in 2012. We are going to have to in the future, but if we're going to be fiscally responsible, we can't do everything at once. So it was about prioritizing. So we think of our buildings, and tonight's a good example, as being community resources for people. We want them to be used. If you were here 2 weeks from now, we'd hear the sound of basketballs bouncing because I'm sure the basketball practices would have started. If you go to any of our buildings, there's stuff going on in the evenings that are our community members being in there. Best example is our Performing Arts Center. The last 2 years, it's been used more than 325 nights out of the year by the community. So, again, we take pride in being an inclusive, innovative, and inspiring district. Pretty much every quote you ever hear from George or myself on TV or the newspapers mentions that. And we believe the options and what we're proposing here on the referendum in November, that does those things for our students, our staffs, and our families.